Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 14th December 2019. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now this editorial on page number 10 and this article on page number 10 both are related to the victory of pro-Brexit candidate Boris Johnson in the UK's election. And Boris Johnson has won a clear majority in the British elections. Now, majority of the articles that are there in today's newspaper related to the victory of Boris Johnson highlight the impact of his victory on the issue of Brexit for Britain. And also, they have highlighted other issues like what could be the impact on the Scottish referendum, how this victory of Boris Johnson will impact the issue of Ireland in England. Now, majority of the issues related to the Brexit have been already covered in a previous DNS video. However, in this article, what we will do is that we will look at what are the likely impacts of Brexit on India. So in this, we will look at what are some of the positive aspects or what are the likely positive impacts for India. And also we'll look at what are the negative impacts for India if the Brexit happens because of clear majority that has been won by the Boris Johnson's party. Now, various aspects of the Brexit have been discussed in the DNS of 18th October 2019. So you can go through this video and understand the various aspects related to Brexit. And after this, let us look at what will be the impact of Brexit on India. Now, looking at the concerns for India due to Brexit, first is that the United Kingdom had been the bridge through which Indian companies used to enter into European Union. Now we note that the European Union is a single market and there is ease of doing trade across the countries which are a part of the European Union. However, if United Kingdom exits from the European Union, this will impact the Indian companies which are based in UK. So presently what Indian companies used to do is that they were based in UK and from there they used to trade with other countries of the European Union. Now, however, if Brexit happens, the Indian companies will have to strive separately for these two different markets. That is, they will have to handle the trade in UK differently from that of the trade in other countries which are part of the European Union. So they will have to devise different or separate strategies for both these markets if UK exits the European Union. Now, an impact of this would be that the Brexit will increase the overhead cost for the Indian companies and also it will increase the cost for setting up of new headquarters in EU on the one hand and UK on the other hand. So this is one of the impacts for the Indian companies which are presently operating in UK. Now one of the good example of this can be the Jaguar which has been acquired by Tata. Now as Tata has acquired Jaguar and because UK is a part of the European Union, Tata enjoys zero custom duty on trade in the European Union market. However, if Britain exits the European Union, the Tata company might face higher logistic cost. Also, there can be custom duties which can be imposed by the EU and also other regulations etc. will make it difficult for the Jaguar to keep up its trade. And this might make the cars of the Jaguar company a bit less competitive as compared to the present times. So this will be the likely impact on the companies which are presently trading in UK. Now, another important concern for India here is the vulnerability of pound after the Brexit. And there can be slide in the value of the pound and this shows the exchange rate uncertainty of the pound. Now, here it should be noted that dollar is the most strong currency across the world. However, if you look at other currencies, pound is the second important currency. And we know that pound is also one of the currencies which has been included under the IMF's special drawing rights or the SDRs. So this shows that pound is also one of the important currencies after the dollar. However, if Britain exits from the European Union and if the value of pound slides down, it will lead to an increase in the value of dollar across the globe. Now, if the value of dollar increases, it adversely impacts the value of other currencies across the world. And this can lead to worsening of the current account deficit for India as the dollar will be strengthened because of sliding of the pound. Now, why this current account deficit for India would increase? So this is mainly because India is mainly dependent upon oil imports. And if the value of dollar increases, the cost of these imports increase. So as India is importing majority of its oil consumption, it might lead to increase in the import bills for India. And that could be one of the reasons for worsening of current account deficit for India if the pound slides and dollar strengthens. Second impact is that the bonds which are raised by Indian firms and companies will see a rise in the servicing costs. So if the exchange rate of dollar was $1 for rupees 70, and if due to Brexit the value of pound slides and there is an increase in the value of dollar, which means that the dollar's value can increase up to 75 rupees or even 80 rupees. Now, due to this, what happens is that if any Indian firm has raised money from the external markets through the external commercial borrowings, and if the value of dollar increases and the value of rupee slides simultaneously, this will increase the cost of interest that the Indian companies have to pay for such borrowings. So that is also one of the impact that the bonds which are raised by Indian firms will see a rise in the servicing costs of such bonds. And the third impact is that Indian exports to UK will suffer due to the collapse or decrease in the value of pound. Now, a simple example can be that if the value of 1 pound as of now was about rupees 80, and if the value of pound slides, this means that the value of rupee is increasing. So the exchange rate, that is 1 pound, will now be exchanged at a lesser price, that is, let's say rupees 70. And as the value of pound decreases, Indian exports will become less competitive. So it is said that if the pound collapses, India's exports to UK might suffer. So these are few of the concerns which have been raised by India regarding the Brexit process. However, despite these concerns, it also provides certain opportunities to India. So let us look at these opportunities which will be created because of Brexit or exit of Britain from the European Union. Now, first is that as the Britain exits from European Union, it will now actively look for trade partners. And we know that India is one of the important trading partners of UK presently. Further, India has had traditionally strong ties with the Britain. And also, India is one of the largest emerging economy in the world. And that is why UK would have a tilt towards India and will increase its trade with India. So that is one of the opportunity that is created by the Brexit from EU. Second is that UK would be freed from strict rule-based trade regime which is followed by European Union presently. And it will simplify the process of India having a free trade agreement with the UK. Now you might be knowing that India and EU are presently negotiating a free trade agreement, and that is known as Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement or BTIA. However, the negotiations for finalizing the BTIA are stuck because of strict rules that are applied by the EU regarding the trade with EU. And that is why India sees this as an opportunity that if UK exits from the EU, such strict rule-based trading regime will not have to be followed by India for its free trade agreement with UK. So it will be easier for India to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Now the third point here that should be noted is that presently all the decisions in the European Union are taken by consensus and they are not taken by the majority. And such a consensus-based decision making makes it difficult for finalizing various issues in the EU. However, if the UK exits from the EU, it will provide greater independence to UK in making its decisions regarding trade with India. So that will also be one of the opportunities that is there for India. And finally, because of the Britain's exit from the EU, the freedom of movement of human resources will be restricted. Now we know that EU is a single market and as such, the movement of goods and human resources is very easy presently. However, if UK exits from the European Union, such movement would become difficult. And that is why UK will have to look for other countries like India for human resources. And that creates an opportunity for India for providing the human resources. And we note that India can exploit its demographic dividend by providing the human resources to UK because of Brexit. So these are few concerns for India, and at the same time, there are also certain opportunities that are available for India. And with this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 9 is related to one of the key or the flagship schemes of Government of India, that was Accessible India Campaign or the Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan. And this article reads that the targets under this Accessible India campaign have been missed or they have been extended. So this shall form a part of General Studies paper 2 under the topic Social Issues. So in this article, we will try and understand what were the targets in the Accessible India campaign and what was the strategy adopted for this Accessible India campaign. Now, regarding the Accessible India campaign, you should note that Government of India started this campaign in the year 2015, and it was supposed to be a nationwide campaign for achieving universal accessibility for persons with disabilities in order to create a barrier-free environment, both physical environment as well as digital environment. So the main focus was creating a barrier-free physical as well as digital environment for people with disabilities. And this Accessible India campaign mainly focused on three primary areas, which included making the public buildings accessible to the people with disabilities, secondly, making public transport accessible to persons with disabilities, and third was making accessible the information and communication technology services to the persons with disabilities. So these were the three strategies which were adopted by the Government of India. And accordingly, various targets were set under this accessibility campaign. Now, what were the targets that were set up by the Government of India under this Accessible India campaign? So first target was related to July 2016, and it was the accessing the audit of at least 50 government buildings in 48 cities and making them fully accessible. So this was the first target. Second target was that making 50% of the government buildings in the NCR and the state capitals fully accessible to the persons with disabilities by July 2019. And third was making an access audit of 50% of the government buildings and making them accessible in the 10 important towns or cities of the states which were not covered under the target 1 or the target 2. And this was to be done by July 2022. However, the Government of India has failed in meeting its first target itself. And presently, the government has extended the deadline for this target 1 to March 2020. So in this case, the first target has been missed and its deadline has been extended to March 2020. So this has been highlighted by the news article. Now, the first pillar of this Accessible India campaign was making the government buildings accessible. And the second is making the public transport accessible to people with disabilities. So this aimed at enhancing the accessibility and usability of public transport. And under this, the accessibility of railway station, airports, bus stops, trains and buses was envisaged. Further, it aimed at adaptation of rail compartments and air carriers along with accessible toilets. And it also provided for making auditory signals on the traffic lights. And for these also, various targets were set up. For example, for making the accessible airports, the aim was that access audit of all the international airports and making them accessible was targeted by July 2016. Secondly, making access audit of all domestic airports was targeted by the year July 2019. Besides this, other targets were set up for railway stations and public transport also. And the third pillar of the Accessible India campaign was the accessibility of information and communication technology services to persons with disabilities. And the aim of this was that to enhance the accessibility and usability of information and communication services. So in this, the main targets were making accessible the public websites, making the public documents and information in accessible formats for persons with disabilities, and also it provided for provisions of captioning and audio description in public television programs. And under this also various targets were set up. For example, making the accessible websites and public documents, the target was of making them by July 2019. So these are few targets that have been set up under the Accessible India campaign. So the important thing is that it is targeting three important pillars. First is making the government buildings accessible. Second is making the airports, railway stations or the public transport accessible to persons with disabilities. And third is related to providing the accessibility of information communication technology services to persons with disabilities. Now, why was this Accessible India campaign required? Now, this was required because of large number of people who are having disability in India. And according to the 2011 census, there are about 2.68 crore persons with disability. Secondly, the Persons with Disability Act of 1995 has various provisions for enhancing the accessibility to the persons with disability. So, in this regard, the Section 44 of this Act provides for non discrimination in transport. Section 45 provides for non discrimination on roads. And Section 48 provides for non discrimination in the built environment. And accordingly, the Government of India started this Accessible India campaign in 2015. Besides this, India is also a member of the important international convention related to disabilities, that is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And as India is a signatory to this convention, it was the responsibility of India for providing or making the government buildings, transport, and ICT accessible to persons with disabilities. And also, an action plan was drawn in the year 2012, which was known as the Incheon Strategy by the UN ESCAP body. And this aimed at ensuring the implementation of accessibility measures in the member countries. So, accordingly, India started this Accessible India campaign in 2015 based on all these conditions. So, these were few highlights of the Accessible India campaign, some of the targets and the pillars or the strategy which has been adopted by the government. And the news shows that the targets have been missed by the government. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 10 highlights the current state of Indian economy. And we know that India is witnessing a low growth rate, and however, this problem has been exacerbated by an increase in the inflation. Now, the low growth rate has been highlighted by the decline in the index of industrial production and also by the decline in the GDP growth rate data for past 6 consecutive quarters. And accordingly, the RBI has been taking steps to ease the monetary policy. And it has also announced rate cuts in the repo rate. However, in the recent monetary policy announcement, the RBI has said that it will keep the policy rates unchanged. And that was because of the increase in the inflation in the Indian economy. Now, this situation where the growth rate is low and the inflation is high has been termed as stagflation. And this term becomes important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So, in this background, the editorial highlights that as the inflation has been increasing and the RBI has not changed its policy rates, there is a need for the government to step in and take measures for improving the status of Indian economy. And regarding the recent steps taken by the Government of India, that is a cut in the corporate tax, the editorial says that such steps are not enough for improving the growth in Indian economy. And as such, there is a need for economic reforms. However, in this we will only learn about this term stagflation, which can be important for us from preliminary examination point of view. So the stagflation is simply a condition of slow economic growth. In such a scenario, it also witnesses relatively high unemployment and it is accompanied by rising prices or inflation. So, a situation where the growth is slow, unemployment is high, and inflation is also high has been termed as stagflation. That is because the economy is stagnating and there is inflation. So, it has been created by merging the terms stagnation and inflation. So, it can also be defined as inflation and a decline in the GDP. So, as we have learned in the Indian economy, there is decline in the growth rate. The high unemployment is shown by the PLFS survey, and also the India's consumer price index highlights that the inflation is also increasing. And that is why it is being said that India is witnessing a kind of stagflation. Now, normally in an economy, if the growth rate is high, the inflation also increases. And for example, India witnessed high growth rate in the first decade of the 21st century. However, this growth was accompanied with high inflation also. Now, in this case, the situation reverses and the growth rate is also slumping, and at the same time, the inflation is increasing. So, in such a situation, the RBI is not able to ease its monetary policy also, and accordingly, it has kept the policy rates unchanged. So these are few points, and with this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 14 is related to the trade war between US and China. And after talks between both these countries, they have decided to pause the ongoing trade war. Now, accordingly, the US and China have announced an agreement which is known as the Phase 1 Agreement. So, this term Phase 1 Agreement can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And under this agreement, both the countries have announced that they will reduce the US tariffs in exchange for increased Chinese purchases of American farm goods. So, this is an announcement related to pausing of the ongoing trade war that is going on between US and China. And in one of the previous DNS videos, we have discussed various aspects of the ongoing trade war between US and China. So what we will do is that we will revise the basic aspects of the trade war that is going on between US and China and what are the pros and cons of a trade war. So let us revise that from the previous DNS video. And in 2018, in the mains examination in the GS paper 3, there was a question which read, how would the recent phenomena of protectionism and currency manipulation in world trade affect the macroeconomic stability of India? So we will try to look at the impact of trade war between US and China on the global economy. Secondly, what are the pros and cons of a trade war? And finally, how has India been dealing with the trade war and what opportunities are there for India to grab? Now, although the steps which are being taken by the US and China to target each other's economies are not important for us from the exam point of view, let us look at a brief overview of what is happening between these two countries. So recently, the United States of America had imposed 15% tariff on the imports, which valued about $300 billion. And the US mainly targeted the products from China for violation of the intellectual property rights of the American companies. And also China was accused of currency manipulations, which is leading to currency wars. Now, as a response to the steps taken by the United States of America, China has announced imposition of tariffs on more than 5,000 products which are imported from US. And these are valued at $75 billion. Also, China has initiated a dispute in the World Trade Organization against United States' unilateral tariff increases. So in this background, let us look at what is the likely impact of this trade war which is going on between the US and the Chinese economy on the global economy. So the first impact of such measures of protectionism that are being taken by US and China is the global economic slowdown. And we know that the global economic slowdown adversely impacts the economies of developing countries which are mainly dependent on exports. Further, the spirit of multilateralism and trust is eroding in solving the global economic disputes, which is reflected in the manner in which the WTO is functioning currently. And in all the negotiations at the World Trade Organization level, United States of America has been repeatedly blocking some of the negotiations which will be helpful for the least developed countries. This is because negotiations at WTO need to be ratified by all the member countries if that provision has to come in force. And USA has been continuously blocking such negotiations, which are especially very useful for least developed countries. Now, another area where the United States of America has been interfering with the WTO is the appointment of members to the appellate body of WTO's dispute resolution mechanism. And this body has become non-functional because the USA has been blocking the appointment of new members. Now you should know here that the members to the appellate body of WTO are appointed based on a consensus among the member countries, and the members are not appointed based on the majority. And that is why if any country blocks the appointment of a member, that person cannot be appointed to the appellate body. Now this appellate body of WTO has 7 members, but presently most of them are retiring and new members are not getting appointed. And if this number of members in the appellate body gets lesser than 4, it will become completely non-functional. And United States, because of its protectionist policies, has been blocking the appointment of members to the appellate body of WTO. Now the issues of WTO have been discussed in the DNS of 1st July 2019. And also there was a question in the mains examination regarding the reforms in WTO that are required. And they were discussed in the DNS of 25th October 2018 in the mains question discussion. So you can go through both these videos to understand the issue at WTO in detail. Now after this, let us look at some of the pros and cons of trade war. So there are certain benefits for the countries which are indulging in trade war, and also there are negatives for these countries as well as other countries. So the first positive or the pro of the trade war is the protection of domestic companies from unfair competitions. This is because the domestic companies sometimes have to compete with cheaper imports from other countries. And if protectionism takes place and tariffs are imposed on imports from other countries, the domestic companies or the products of these domestic companies will become competitive. And it is likely that these companies will earn more profit, which will in turn be good for the local economy. And for example, United States is indulging in trade war with China and is imposing tariffs on the Chinese imports. This is likely to help the domestic companies of United States of America. Now, as tariffs are imposed on the imports, it is likely that the demand for domestic goods will increase. Now, because of protectionism, outsourcing is not lucrative. And this is because there are high tariffs on imports from other countries, and also there are certain restrictions on trades with other countries. And that is why, as the outsourcing is reduced, it also promotes local job growth. Further, if the country is importing more as compared to its exports, it is likely that there will be trade deficit. So in such a scenario, if protectionism takes place, it is likely that the trade deficit will reduce and there will be improvement in the current account of the country. And such a measure generally punishes the nations which are indulging into unethical trade policies. For example, if other countries are providing subsidy to their exports and flooding the domestic market, such protectionism helps in punishing these countries. However, there are certain negatives of trade wars also, and these include increased costs and induces inflation. This is because sometimes due to the lack of imports of cheaper goods, the prices of domestic products increases. Also, it causes marketplace shortages and it reduces the choice of the customers. Further, it discourages international trade and it can also lead to the slowdown of economic growth because if more tariffs are imposed on other countries, it is likely that the foreign direct investment in the country can be impacted. And ultimately, it has implications on the diplomatic relations between two countries. So, as we have seen, there are certain positives of the trade war and also there are certain negatives of the trade war. Now, after this, let us look at what is the likely impact of trade war on India and how India can benefit from such a trade war between the major economies of the world. Now, the first impact on India of this trade war is that it provides India the opportunity to emerge as a supplier of the products which are being banned by the United States of America. And if India becomes a major supplier of products to the United States, its competitiveness will also increase globally. And as such, it can have a major boost for India's exports. Another issue is that United States has been blocking the appointment to the appellate body of WTO. However, India has argued for multilateral forums to settle the trade disputes. And in this regard, India has argued for empowering the trade dispute resolution mechanism at WTO. So India has mainly been in favor of multilateralism. However, the steps which are being taken by the United States of America are opposed to the India's stand on these issues. Further, other impact on the developing countries like India is the risk of capital outflows. And we know that when there is an ongoing trade war in the global economy, the foreign portfolio investment in the developing countries reduces. And if such outflows of capital from the developing countries increases, it has negative impact on the outlook of growth and macroeconomic stability of these developing countries. So in this background, what India needs to do? Now, as we all know that India is not a major exporting nation. Now, as the United States of America is imposing higher tariffs on the imports from China, it provides an opportunity to India to emerge as the supplier of those products. However, for that, India needs to prepare well and it should focus on infrastructure development, and such focus should be mainly on export infrastructure, for example, access to electricity, ports, etc. Further, India should focus on coastal economic zones. It should also focus on integrating more closely with the global value chains. Further, as India has been demanding, it should give more focus and attention to the improvement in the global dispute resolution mechanisms of WTO, etc. Further, there is a need for strengthening the Reserve Bank of India so that it can act in response to the capital outflows and also the currency fluctuations. Further, there is a need for promoting ease of doing business, and also India has close ties with countries like US and has closer ties with ASEAN, EU and Russia. Thus, India can emerge as an important player or negotiating player in such a scenario where global countries are indulging into the trade war. So, these were few opportunities for India. There are certain perpetual issues on which India and other countries differ, and these are the focus areas where India should pay due attention. So, after going through all these points, you can try and answer this question from your mains examination point of view. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, in this article on page number 12, the foreign minister of Maldives is visiting India presently, and he has said that Maldives is negotiating the debt from China. Now, this step of the Maldives becomes important because previously the former president of Maldives, Mohammad Nasheed, who is also from the ruling party and is the Speaker of the House in Maldives, had said before the elections that Maldives will scrap the free trade agreement with China. However, the statement by the foreign minister of Maldives indicates that the present government does not intend to cancel the infrastructure projects or loans at present as the ruling party had promised ahead of the elections last year. Now, in this background, you should note that Maldives was undergoing a political crisis in the past, and India and China also had their stakes in the political crisis of the Maldives. And regarding this Maldives crisis and the formation of the new government in the Maldives, we have discussed in a previous DNS video. And also previously in the mains examination, a question was asked regarding the impact of the political crisis in Maldives on India. So what we'll do is that we will again revise from that DNS video the crisis that happened in the Maldives and what were the reactions of different countries regarding the political crisis in Maldives. Previously in the year 2013, a question was asked which read, discuss the political development in Maldives in the last 2 years. Should they be of any cause of concern to India? So we'll try to understand the India-Maldives relations and the timeline of the crisis. Also, we will try to understand what are the recent issues that have developed between India and Maldives. Now, the crisis in Maldives has been discussed in detail in the Focus magazine of March month. So we will try to understand key facts related to the crisis and the timeline of the crisis as well. So in the month of March, the crisis in Maldives was because of a verdict by Supreme Court and it led to a constitutional crisis. So the crisis in Maldives started in the year 2012. Now in 2012, the Chief Justice of Maldives was arrested by the government led by the President Mohammad Nasheed. The arrest led to a revolt by the police and bureaucracy. Under pressure, the President Nasheed resigned and asserted that he was forced out in a coup. And finally, a Commonwealth-backed investigation denied the claim of President Nasheed that he was forced to quit because of a coup. Now, in the year 2013, after the removal of President Nasheed, elections were again held and Abdullah Yameen won the presidential election. But this election was annulled by the Supreme Court of Maldives, and Supreme Court also suspended the election commissioner of the Maldives. However, despite these annulment by the Supreme Court, the Abdullah Yameen government continued in office. In the year 2015, the previous president Mohammad Nasheed was arrested on the charges of terrorism and he was jailed for 13 years under the Abdullah Yameen government. The arrests led to protests across Maldives and an emergency was declared by the current president Yameen. Now in the year 2016, the former president Mohammad Nasheed was granted medical leave to United Kingdom. However, upon leaving Maldives, he was granted a refugee status in the United Kingdom. However, as a reaction to this, the Maldives left the Commonwealth after it was threatened with suspension to ensure fair and transparent democracy in Maldives. So in 2012, the crisis in Maldives was started by the arrest of Chief Justice of Maldives by the government of President Mohammad Nasheed. However, under pressure, the President Nasheed had to resign and he claimed that he was forced out because of a coup. Further, in the year 2013, another election was held and Abdullah Yameen won the presidential election. However, in this case, the Supreme Court annulled the election, but despite the annulment of the election, the Abdullah Yameen government continued in office. In the year 2015, the former President Mohammad Nasheed was arrested and due to this, protests were held across Maldives. And due to this, the present government at that point of time declared the emergency. In the year 2016, Mohammad Nasheed was granted medical leave to United Kingdom and upon leaving Maldives, he was granted refugee status in United Kingdom. Due to this, Maldives left the Commonwealth. Now, the recent crisis in the year 2018 in Maldives started when the Supreme Court of Maldives ordered the release of several opposition leaders that were arrested and jailed by the President Yameen government. Now, the people who were arrested included the former President Nasheed as well. In this case, The Attorney General of Maldives asserted that the government cannot follow the Supreme Court ruling and turned the Supreme Court order as illegal. However, subsequently, the Parliament of Maldives, which is named as the Majlis, and the Supreme Court were shut down, and several opposition leaders, such as the former President Gayoom, were arrested by the President Yamin government. And finally, due to this crisis, President Yamin declared the emergency in Maldives. So, in the year 2018, the crisis again started because of the Supreme Court ruling, which asked for release of several opposition leaders. Now, let us understand the reactions to Maldives crisis and the concerns raised by India. Now, regarding the Chinese reaction on Maldives crisis, China and the President Yamin government have showed reciprocal understanding and friendship, which was mostly seen in the Maldives, which signed first country-specific free trade agreement with China. Now, China has asserted that a homegrown solution should be provided to the Maldivian crisis. However, it indirectly asserted that other countries should not interfere in the Maldivian crisis. Now, the concern regarding homegrown solution is that the homegrown solution would help President Yamin since the opposition is either in exile or in jail. Therefore, such a solution would not be strongly negotiated and would therefore favor the Yamin government itself. So, the crux of this point is that China and the President Yamin government have a reciprocal understanding and friendship. Now, this was visible in the first country-specific free trade agreement signed by Maldives with China. And China has asserted for a homegrown solution which favors the President Yamin government because the opposition leaders are either in jail or in exile. Now, the Indian reaction has been that India has asserted that the President Yamin government should lift the emergency and allow for a free and transparent functioning of the Maldives parliament and judiciary. Now, India also wants the political prisoners to be freed. Further, it has been asserted that India should protect its national interest in Maldives. Now, this is because it is feared that if India does not take care of its national interests, Maldives will become a client state of China, and therefore India should ensure its strategic stronghold in Maldives. So, the Indian demand is that the emergency should be lifted, free and transparent functioning of Maldives parliament and judiciary should be started, all the political prisoners should be freed. Further, India should protect its national interest because of the dangers that are posed by China. Now, the former president of Maldives, Mohammad Nasheed, has asked India to showcase gunboat diplomacy. Now, gunboat diplomacy means the display of naval power with the threat of military action such as naval blockade. Now, he has asserted that India has represented itself as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. Therefore, India should provide security to democracy in Maldives. Now, based on the demand of Mohammad Nasheed, the former president of Maldives, the military intervention by India has the following concerns. First, it is that India has asserted that it is not India's role or duty to form democracy in Maldives. It is for the people of Maldives to decide their political future. Further, India should not enforce democracy from a top-up approach of a military intervention. Further, India has previously intervened during humanitarian crises in the neighborhood. These include in Bangladesh in the year 1971 when Bangladesh was freed from Pakistan, in Jaffna, Sri Lanka during the 1980s. Now, although India had intervened in the neighboring countries due to humanitarian crisis, currently there is no humanitarian crisis in Maldives. That is why India is refraining from interfering in Maldives. Further, South Asia is a hotbed of political and constitutional crisis, and India cannot intervene each time. Further, Indian intervention might politically strengthen fundamentalist groups in Maldives and give China an excuse to also intervene and reimpose India's big brother image in South Asia. Now, previously, India has intervened in a crisis in Maldives. It was a military intervention. Now, the name of that military intervention was Operation Cactus. Now, this is important for us. Now, during the Operation Cactus, there was an attempt of a coup against the Maldivian government in 1988. This was by the mercenaries of Tamil secessionist movement, which was led by the Tamilian separatist groups of Sri Lanka, which is famously known as LTTE. Now, this coup was failed due to military intervention in Maldives by India, and it was codenamed as Operation Cactus. Now, the recent instances of deterioration of relations between India and Maldives have been presented in the present news articles. These include, first, Maldives is not renewing work visas of Indians who are already working in Maldives. Further, Maldives is not issuing work permits to Indians for fresh jobs in Maldives. And finally, the refusal by Maldives to extend the deadline of Indian helicopters given to Maldives on lease. India wants this lease to be extended. However, Maldivian government is refusing this. Now, the future of India-Maldives relations does not look good because up till now, people-to-people relations were not affected by the issues between both countries. However, these recent steps by Maldives government would negatively affect the people-to-people relation. And India wants that people-to-people relations should not be deteriorated because of political issues. Now, the question that was asked in mains examination in year 2013 was about the political developments that had happened in 2013. We have discussed all the political developments that have happened in Maldives since 2012 till 2018. We have also highlighted the recent issues between India and Maldives. Also, we have learned that how these political developments are affecting India. So, this is an important topic from mains point of view. With this, let us move on to the next article. Now, after going through the political crisis that happened in Maldives and also some of the reactions of different countries on that political crisis, let us revise from another DNS video where we have covered the election results of the Maldives. And in that video, we also discussed about various issues that were being faced by the Maldives at that time. And this news article that is in news, that is Maldives is negotiating the debt with China, is a continuation of those issues. So in the election results, the President Yamin was defeated by the joint opposition candidate in the elections that were held in the Maldives. And regarding President Yamin, you should note that he had imposed emergency which had led to a political turmoil in Maldives. Now after this, let us devise from that DNS video where we have discussed the various issues that were being faced by Maldives at that time. Now let us understand various issues in Maldives one by one. Now the first issue was related to the free trade agreement with China. So the Maldives had recently signed its first country-specific free trade agreement with China in 2017. And by this, Maldives became China's second free trade agreement in South Asia after Pakistan. However, the Maldives opposition, which has recently won the election, had opposed the free trade agreement. They argued that it will deepen the debt trap to the China. This is because more than 70% of the Maldives' foreign debt is owned by China. This was also a cause of concern for India because of the growing economic influence of China in Maldives. The second issue was the political instability in Maldives. Now, recently, the Supreme Court of Maldives had ordered the release of several opposition leaders. And these opposition leaders were arrested and jailed by the current President Yamin government, which has recently lost the elections. Further, these arrested leaders included the former President Nasheed, and subsequently the Parliament of Maldives and the Supreme Court was shut down. And several opposition leaders such as former President Gayoom were also arrested by the President Yamin government. The President Yamin government had further declared emergency in Maldives. So all these were leading to a political turmoil and political instability in Maldives. However, in the recently held election, the President Yamin government has been defeated by the joint opposition. So let us wait and watch how the political situation unfolds in Maldives after the victory of joint opposition and the formation of a new government. Now, the third important issue that Maldives is facing is the presence of ISIS or the Islamic State and the Daesh forces in Maldives. Now, under this, due to the continuous defeat of Daesh forces in Syria and Iraq, these fighters have been returning to Maldives, and these pose a security threat for India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. So, this is an important cause of concern for India because of security reasons. Fourth is the neo-colonial influence of China. And there has been a growing trend of Chinese companies and individuals acquiring land in Maldives. Now, this land grab is being seen in excess of what the East India Company had acquired during the colonial period in Maldives. And this land grab has raised concern of Maldives being increasingly falling into a economic neo-colonial influence of China. So this is also a cause of concern for India because of the growing influence of China in its neighborhood. Further, let us understand the India's stand on the Maldives issue. Now, under this, the India had asserted that the President Yamin government, which has been recently defeated in the elections, to lift the emergency and allow for free and transparent functioning of the Maldives parliament and judiciary. Further, India had also asserted that the political prisoners should be released. Also, India had asserted that Maldives should continue following the India First policy, thereby ensuring that Maldives does not become a client state of China. And therefore, India wanted Maldives to follow the India First policy. Now, the President Yamin government was seen by India as being pro-China. However, with the defeat of Yamin government, there is hope that India-Maldives relations will improve. So this is a news in transition, and let us wait and watch how the story unfolds. Now, after today's discussion, you should try and answer these questions from your preliminary examination point of view. Now, in today's newspaper, majority of the news articles were related to mains examination only. And that is why we are only taking 2 practice questions. And the answer will be displayed after 5 seconds. Now the first question reads, the term stagflation sometimes appears in the news, refers to which of the following? So as we have learned, it refers to low growth and inflation. Question second is related to a previous year question that was asked in the year 2012, and it is related to environment and ecology. Question reads, consider the following organisms, bat, bee and bird, and it requires us to answer as to which of the above is or are pollinating agent or agents. So here you should note that all the three are pollinating organisms. Thus D is the correct answer. 1, 2 and 3 are the answers. With this we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.